If you don't know this about me, I studied illustration for 4 years here in Ontario, and when I tell people that, I generally get the same response. Wow, I could never do that. I'm too left-brained or logical to learn that kind of stuff. I'm a terrible artist. All I can draw is stick figures. Wrong. Don't lie to yourself. You can draw. In art school, I think I learned about 100 different ways to draw people, for example, from fellow students, professors, online, you name it. And they range from great to just fine, but nothing really clicked with me until I took an anatomical illustration class in my second year. See, a lot of art methods focus on having you look at something in real life and draw exactly what you see, translating 3-dimensional to 2 dimensions in the process. And that means ignoring anything you might presume to be true about what the object looks like as a whole. You know, hands, they usually have 5 fingers, but if I do like this, you're not going to see my thumb, so you're not going to draw my thumb. You're only going to draw 4 if you only see 4. But if you're a more logical thinker, that might be really challenging, because it's hard to ignore what you perceive as a fact about hands. Now, old masters in the Renaissance, like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, were avid scientists. They were logical thinkers, and that played a huge role in their art, and vice versa. Da Vinci would conduct thorough dissections, draw his findings, and use those findings to improve and influence his art. See, if you can't draw what you see on the surface, the only other option is to dive in deep. Understanding many layers deep into your subject, how it works, and what's happening with it right in front of you can help you draw realistic forms, and is even a stepping stone to becoming a scientific illustrator. So let's begin with people. Let's take a look at what's happening not only on the surface, but beneath it. We're going to start with the skeleton, the literal bones of your drawing, and work our way outwards, building around it to kind of sculpt our figures on paper, instead of just trying to find those outlines and copying them down. Most artists break the skeleton down into basic shapes when they're drawing. I've seen a lot of different methods for this, but it's usually a curvy line for the spine, an oval for the rib cage, lines for the limbs, circles for the joints, a line marking out the shoulders and the hips and the angle that they sit on in relation to one another, and a circle or a heart shape for the pelvis. Some people like to go into more details. They'll add like a gentle curve for the bones and the limbs, or more specific shapes for the ribs or pelvis so that they have a better idea of where to place the muscles. But the reason we don't need to get into much detail as a whole for the skeleton is because generally you don't really see them in person. There are a few exceptions where bone structure really shows through though. If you can start your drawing by marking those moments on your reference, you can begin to piece together what's happening in your figure altogether. The most obvious, and I think the most important example, is the anterior superior iliac crest, or the ASIS. It's the upper arch of your pelvis, commonly known as your hip bones. They're great because they're generally pretty easy to find, and you can use them as an anchor point when you're trying to figure out the rest of the hips, the torso, and the thighs. The tilt of the pelvis is also really important for your pose. It greatly affects how the legs are oriented and the way the shoulders will be angled. If the shoulders are angled in the opposite direction of the hips, your figure will look natural and balanced, while if they're in the same direction, your figure will look dynamic, like it's in motion. You can actually feel the ASIS, by the way. It's, what you commonly know as the hip bone. It pokes out a little bit on thinner figures. The femur connects to the pelvis just below the ASIS. It's important to note the neck and the head of the femur are at an angle from the shaft, so the bone actually sits a bit wider than the pelvis on most models, making the widest part of the body lower than what we consider to be the hips. Anywhere else there's a joint, we'll see some bone too. Understanding the structure of those joints makes drawing them a lot easier. The shoulders, for example, are articulated not just in the humerus, but in the clavicle and the shoulder blade too. So movement in this joint affects that entire side of the upper torso. Elbows, in contrast, are only a hinge, so the joint is much more angular. Moving down the leg, keep in mind that the calf is made of 2 bones, the fibula and the tibia. The tibia is the main weight-bearing bone, and the fibula allows for extra dexterity. Animals that have no fibula, like horses, can't rotate their ankles and legs like we can. The forearm is similar and a lot more noticeable. If you put your arm at your side with your palm forward, the ulna and radius are sitting side by side. If you twist your arm, face your palm backwards, they're crossed. And that's why you can see a bit of a different shape as you rotate your arm, especially right up at that elbow joint. Lastly, for the skeleton, there's the ribs. They won't be visible in every model, but they're important to note because while costovertebral joints connect the rib to the spine, they don't articulate nearly as much as the rest of the body. That's why artists mark it out. It's a part of the body that will generally stay stiff, no matter how much the figure is bending and twisting. It's also important to note that it's not bone all the way around the sternum. There's a pretty defined bend in the rib where it becomes costal cartilage. I don't know if it's costal or coastal. I've heard it both ways. You can mark that out if you feel you need to see that angle change in the torso to give it a more round, three-dimensional shape. There are 12 pairs of ribs. The first 7 are called true ribs because they attach to the sternum with cartilage individually. 8, 9, and 10 are called false ribs because they actually connect to the rib above itself rather than directly to the sternum, which kind of makes a bit of a mass of cartilage down near the bottom. And the last 2 are floating ribs. They provide protection for the organs, but they aren't attached to the sternum for increased flexibility. There's also the clavicle, which is really easy to catch at the top of the rib cage, attached to the top of your sternum, and that connects to your shoulders and it connects to your pecs. So it's really easy to build off of that one as well. Muscles are, quite literally, the meat of your drawing. Everyone has them, and they contribute the most to the volume of your figures. If you've ever read comic books, you've seen how important muscles are in drawings. Even in this relatively cartoonish form, muscle structure is taken very seriously by a number of artists. Because muscles move depending on where in your body we're focusing our efforts, recreating that in an action scene is the perfect way to tell the viewer how hard the character is working, how heavy the thing they're holding is, and how hard they're about to punch somebody. Luckily, when it comes to muscles, we only really need to know what's happening on the very surface to understand and recreate it in art. Don't get me wrong, it still leaves a lot of stuff on the table, but I'll try to keep it pretty simple. The upper arms is pretty simple if you exclude the shoulder blades, which I'll talk more about later. The deltoid is the big one on top of your shoulder that flexes to move your arm up and down, and it's sort of an upside down teardrop shape that nestles in between your triceps and your biceps, which create the front and back of your arm above the elbow. The biceps brachii are what let you bend your hand towards your shoulder, and you can feel that muscle move as you do so and see it in a lot of people. And there's actually a deeper muscle in there called the brachialis that's doing most of the work, but the bicep is much more showy. Triceps do the opposite. They let you straighten your arm or push down from the elbow. It sits a little higher on the arm than the bicep when flexed, and because the tricep collects into a tendon above the elbow, they can kind of look like they have 2 points. The forearm holds the muscles that control the fingers, and there's so many of those that it's not really worth getting into. The brachioradialis is the most important one, in my opinion, and it's the one that flexes along with the extensor carpi radialis longus to assist the biceps and the brachialis when you bend at the elbow. It really pops up when the thumb is pointing upwards as well. Once you get down to the wrists and hands, joint structure becomes the key player again. If your figure is standing, your leg muscles are being used. Balancing on our 2 feet requires us to be stable from all sides, so it takes a lot of power and a fairly complicated structure to do so. The quadriceps make up most of the front of the thigh. They consist of 3 masses connecting at the head of the humerus down to the knee, and they flex when our legs are straight, which is to say a lot. The 2 muscle masses on either side come down a bit further than the center one, kind of framing out the knee. Emerging from the outside of the hip is the sartorius. Not the strongest or most obvious muscle in the body, but is really clear on some figures, especially dancers, as it provides a lot of stability and helps rotate and flex at the knee. In little ways, it also helps you lift your thigh and move your leg out to the side. The sartorius wraps around the thigh, crossing over the top of the quadriceps and ending at the inside of the knee. It connects close to that asis, so you can use that landmark to help figure it out. On the inner thigh, starting at the bottom of the pelvis, there's a triangular muscle called the adductor. This one is also critical for balance. It moves the legs inwards. So if you've ever heard someone to tell you to squeeze your legs when you're squatting, they're telling you to flex your adductors. The gluteus medius is also a triangle shape, this time on the outside of the leg, connecting to the asis, that hip bone we talked about earlier. It does the opposite of the adductor. It moves your legs out to the side. Connecting to the bottom of it and running down the thigh and a little over the knee is the iliotibial tract. People commonly call this one the IT band, and it's the knee stabilizer, helping you lift your leg to the front and side. On the back side of your leg is your gluteus maximus, also known as your butt, which is a powerhouse of a muscle, huge in comparison to a lot of others. Below that, you've got your hamstrings. Like quads, this is a collection of 3 muscles which help you lift your leg up behind you, stand up straight, and bend at the knee. So they're another critical muscle that we're using basically all the time. The lower leg is complicated in the same way that the forearm is. There's a lot of little stuff going on that ultimately helps move the foot in all the ways that it needs to, which are many. The front of the leg is mainly bone and tendon, not much for us to worry about. You can see the tibialis anterior on most models, which is nestled right next to that patellar tendon. On the back, we have the soleus and the gastrocnemius, which a lot of artists treat as a singular mass or two big ovals. The gastrocnemius is the larger of the two, traveling from the femur to the heel. It's important to note that this muscle group is asymmetrical and can be seen from the front. I find quite often I need to take a step back on my drawings to figure out which side of those muscles need to be on the outside versus the inside of the leg. The pectoralis major and the rectus abdominis are the most helpful torso muscles for creating a figure that looks like it has a full three-dimensional shape, because they sort of make up the front plane of the body. There's actually another layer of muscles over the abs, but it's pretty thin, so those abdominal muscles still show through, depending on the amount of fat on the body. The bumps in the abs are made by tendinous intersections on the muscle, and the more defined the muscle, the bigger those bumps are, up to a limit of, I think, 10. I think you can have a 10-pack technically, but most often the bottom muscles on the abs are covered by a layer of stomach fat. However many pack you have on your abs, the two at the bottom are more of a triangular shape that point down to the pelvis. The pecs connect to the sternum, the clavicle, the biceps, and the deltoids. Keep in mind that they sort of come to a point nesting between the deltoid and biceps and aren't a flat line across the torso. They're flexed most when you're trying to press your hands against one another in front of you, and they also make up the front wall of your armpit. Emerging from your clavicle and traveling up behind the ear is the sternocleidomastoid, which are the muscles in your neck that you can see when people are yelling and yawning. Obliques surround the rectus abdominis and make up most of the side torso, and you can see them a bit from the back as well. On some very muscular figures, you can also see the serratus anterior. This moves the scapula forwards, which helps us reach really far, and some people call them boxer muscles because you can often catch a glimpse of them when a boxer is mid-punch. They're often mistaken for ribs as well because they sit right on top of them in the armpit. Moving around to the back, we only have a few major shapes. The trapezius is a big diamond shape that starts at the base of your skull, reaches out, connects to the bony protrusions of your scapula, and down to roughly your mid-back. It mostly controls the scapula with some help from the serratus anterior, but while that one helps you reach forward, the trapezius helps you stretch backwards, stretching your arms out behind you and squeezing your shoulder blades together. The latissimus dorsi is below that, reaching up to the armpit, connecting to the spine, and finishing off at the base of the spine where it becomes tendon. That connection to the armpit is what lets us pull our arms down and towards ourselves, like if you were to do a pull-up, if you could do a pull-up. Lastly, there's the erector spinae. This is a cushion and articulator for the spine. It's one of those critical muscles in good posture. It lets you kind of arch the back and tilt your head to look up. It's the reason that in some models, instead of seeing like the vertebrae, the bony part of the spine, you'll see a sort of valley running down the back. It's being surrounded by muscle. Now, I've said a lot of stuff that is generally universal about humans, but that doesn't mean there isn't variety to the human form. Unfortunately, to talk about muscles, I need to talk about and show muscly people, but that doesn't actually reflect the average human being. Some people just find that they have an easier time building muscle in certain areas, or they live a lifestyle that works specific muscles more than others, so you'll get a variety in who's muscular where and who's muscular at all. People like me, for example, don't have a lot of muscle definition, and it's pretty obvious where my skeleton lies under the surface. Other people have more body fat, which, by the way, doesn't make greater or lesser value in a person. Body fat tends to build most around major muscle groups, on the stomach, the thighs, and sometimes the pecs. Women tend to build more fat on the thighs and rear as an evolutionary tactic to make sitting while pregnant more comfortable. Women also carry more fat in general as an energy reserve, which is also an evolutionary tactic related to pregnancy. It's more difficult to map out a skeleton on those figures, but surface anatomy is still there. Aging is also a factor in bodies. A lot of muscle only connects to bone at their beginning and end, so as people age, muscle loosens a little and can appear more slack. A great example is the fat or flab people complain about under their arms, which is actually their tricep being pulled by gravity after years of hard work. And then there's skeletal differences. Some people grow up to be tall, and this change is usually mostly seen in the length of the femur and a little in the tibia and fibula. Some people have wider shoulders or hips or big hands or a small rib cage. Some people are born without certain limbs or have other differences in their extremities. And it's the job of both artists and scientists to recognize, represent, and understand these differences in our work, so our readers and viewers can develop a greater comprehension of the world as a whole, not as a monolith. If you don't have the time and money for art school, and who does, you can find drawing references online pretty easily. Lineofaction.com is great for drawing sessions that mimic art school's drawing classes. It flips to a new photo at regular intervals, which forces you to learn to draw quickly and confidently. Everybody's first day of observational drawing in art school involves sitting down with a model, and that model will change poses every 30 seconds. For more detailed, muscly photos, typing in any sport plus photoshoot or plus Olympian gets you great, well-lit, high-quality results. I recommend dancers, gymnasts, swimmers, or other sports where athletes tend to wear tight or minimal clothing. Drawing fabric is kind of a whole other animal. If you're feeling more confident with those, you can start to draw more variety in bodies. I recommend searching shot put athletes or weightlifters. Honestly, just try a whole bunch of different sports or lifestyles. Or you can just look at stock photos for some average people. If you'd like to learn to draw like comic artists, you can try literally drawing from comic books. They're quite often exaggerated in some areas, so you can start to learn how they do that by drawing muscle anatomy over top of those, or recreating it on a separate piece of paper. Lastly, for anatomy references, you can find loads of diagrams for free online. For specifics, I have 3 book recommendations. Figure Drawing, Design and Intervention by Michael Hampton. This is an anatomy book specifically for artists. It has examples of various body parts from various angles, simplified muscle diagrams, and chapters on how to use all that information and actually draw them. The Atlas of Anatomy. This is actually a medical textbook, so it's a little costly for my purposes, but I got it as a hand-me-down and I have found it really useful. It's way more in-depth than anything I'm able to talk about, so if you want to get advanced, specific, and maybe even draw your own internal diagrams, something like this is the way to go. And this is The Resurrectionist, The Lost Work of Dr. Spencer Black by E.B. Hudspeth. This is a fictional anatomy book. There's a lot of illustrations of mythical animals, and I found it useful for piecing together how I might draw, say, like a mermaid or a centaur. It also has a fun, spooky vibe and a bit of a story to it, so it's a really fun coffee table book. I also use the Skelly app sometimes to get a better understanding of what's going on with my subject's skeleton. When I went to art school, I spent around 3 hours each week drawing the human figure from life for 4 years. Needless to say, volume is key. Draw a lot, draw different things, and draw without seeking perfection. A professor once told me, your first 1,000 drawings will be shit, and it's best to just get them out of the way as soon as possible. So yeah, you can draw. You just haven't found a method that works for you, and it's just not looking like your 1001st drawing yet. I haven't done a video like this before, but I might make it a series, so let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to learn to draw in this style. Maybe you want me to get into more detail with a specific body part, or you want me to talk about another animal, or see me draw something live with this method. Let me know.